Good evening, everybody. Good morning, everybody, depending where you are. My name is David Goodman. I'm the director of the China Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Before we start right now, may I acknowledge the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on which the university is based. These are lands which were never ceded, and we recognise the ongoing influence of their elders, past, present, and traditions, past, present, and emerging. Today, we're very delighted to host a webinar from Wiebke Rabe, who's from the University of Bremen. Wiebke has just published a book on China's provinces going global, which is, of course, the topic of her presentation. If you would like to ask questions at the end of the presentation, please list them in the Q&A facility at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and I will relay them to the speaker later on. Wiebke comes to us with a stellar career, despite it having been rather rushed, that has taken her from Berlin to Suzhou in China, and now back to Bremen. She works as, those of you who've read not just this book, but other parts of her oeuvre, she works on resources, and particularly China's internationalization of resources. So over to you, Wiebke. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, David, for this very kind introduction and for inviting me. Thank you very much, Yang, also for organizing this wonderful event and for giving me the possibility to present my book and discuss the book with all of you and hear your thoughts and questions. So this book just came out this year. It's the result of my PhD research process, which I started in 2015 at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. The title of the book is China's Provinces Go Global, Internationalization Under Guided Autonomy. Next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. The idea for this book emerged during the time of 2015, a little bit earlier, when I found a lot of headlines and covers in the media which were portraying China's increasing overseas investment at that time. And I selected 3 of them to show them to you. The first one is one from The Economist. It says, "Buying up the world, the coming wave of Chinese takeovers." The next one says, "China buys the world. The Chinese have 2 trillion and are going shopping. Is your company and your country on their list?" And the last one, which I'm showing to you, says, "Being eaten by the dragon, what it feels like to be bought by a Chinese firm." And what is very remarkable with all of these 3 covers, and you can find it in similar covers as well, that they all present China and Chinese investment, China as a very monolithic investor. They also suggest that China's investment, all China's investment, is basically a state-led, especially a central state-led endeavor. And they also present a significant perspective that Chinese investment is a threat to the world. So this I found quite interesting because in China studies, of course, we know that China is not that monolithic. And I was very much interested in unpacking this China monolithic investor and look more into the details, the nuances of China's overseas investment. I will present this in more details. Before this, I will show a graph to you, which presents China's increasing overseas investment from 2005 to 2022. So here on this red line, you can really see how China's overseas investment flows in comparison to other BRICS countries, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, and India, has increased over the years and has especially increased after 2011. So these covers I just showed to you are basically portraying this increasing China's overseas investment. And in comparison to the United States, next slide, please. We can see that in 2022, China still ranked 26th in the world in terms of its investment outflows. And then in 2015, China already ranked second after the United States, or followed by the United States, after the United States. And in 2020, China already ranked first in the world. So this is really a very remarkable growth. And this leads us to the claim I'm making that China really seems to be a very special case among BRICS countries, and also a special case in terms of its very rapid increasing overseas investment. And when we look more deeply into this red line, when we try to add some nuance into this red line, we can see that China is not a very monolithic investor. This graph here shows from 2007 to 2022, China's central so state-owned FDI outflows. And we can see here there is a little bit of fluctuation, but there is not really a trend towards increasing investment or decreasing investment. It remains relatively stable. So this is one part of this red line I have shown you before. And in comparison to this central outward investment flows, we also have local or subnational outward investment, which comes from provinces, from cities, which are state-owned, like provincial-owned companies, municipality-owned companies, as well as private-owned company. And the next slide, the next line shows that this very increasing outward investment, which I presented earlier, really can be attributed to China's subnational investment outflows. Here we really can see the steep increase, which overtook also in 2015 the central state-owned enterprises investment outflows. It peaked in 2016, which was the peak of China's investment outflows in the past years, and then afterwards decreased again. So we really can see a difference between local outward FDI and central outward FDI. And when we zoom a little bit more into this red line, again into these local FDI flows, then we can see a regional variation of cumulative investment. And the next slide presents to you the map of China with the provinces and the differences in cumulative outward FDI between 2007 and 2022. And the darker the color of the provinces or municipalities, the higher the investment outflows have been during these years. And we can see very clearly the eastern Chinese provinces, Shandong, Jiangsu, Zhejiang province, are really front runners. The top outward investing province was or is Guangdong province. Shanghai has very high investment outflows. Beijing also has very high investment outflows. And in comparison to these eastern coastal Chinese provinces, we see the more west we get, and also in the north, Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, especially Qinghai, Tibet, there the outward investment is very, very low still. So my research puzzle I was asking in my thesis and also in my book is, why is it that some Chinese provinces have such high outward investment? And we could just argue, yes, because these coastal provinces are those provinces which are also those provinces which have the highest economic development, but it doesn't really tell us the mechanisms, like why really these provinces could become so successful in investing overseas. And it's quite surprising in a certain way also that we have this high investments, because provincial investors, they are often small and medium-sized enterprises, and they face higher risks compared to central state-owned enterprises. They have often fewer access to financial resources and support. It's more difficult for them to get information about host countries, legal environments of host countries, how to navigate through the Chinese approval and registration procedures in order to be allowed to invest overseas. And they also behave in a much more market-oriented manner, seeking to increase their profit instead of only following a central government policy initiative. And what is also very puzzling about these investors is, previous slide, please, that they have still, besides these factors of difficulty to accessing information, to having enough financial resources, they are still able, or these provinces are still able to invest in distant host countries like African countries, Latin American countries, European countries, all over the world, basically, also in the US. They invest in complex legal environments because each country has its own legal environment. They invest in countries with very different business cultures, sometimes in regions which lack good infrastructure, sometimes in regions which are also unstable in terms of their political environment, and sometimes in regions where there are already strong competitors present. So this is all relatively puzzling, and this is why I'm very much interested in answering this research question. And the previous research on China's overseas investments, especially the international business literature, next slide, please, shows that it cannot really give answer or a sufficient answer to the question I was asking. There is a literature which very much focuses on enterprises' motivations, and this literature finds that enterprises are interested in accessing markets, resources, assets, basically very similar compared to Western countries' investors. Then literature also looks at some basically only central state interests and presents some mixed findings on the role of the state in guiding and supporting China's overseas investments. So here we don't really know what is actually the role of the state. And what this literature also very much has in common is that it provides often large and statistical analysis. So this literature doesn't really disaggregate across provinces, doesn't that much or very rarely look at specific provinces, differences between provinces, and therefore provides very little insights into the domestic subnational mechanisms. And then there is a second bunch of literature, which is I call it the China studies literature, which is very familiar to us in a way that it highlights China as a very decentralized country. We know the notion of fragmented authoritarianism or notions of federalism, Chinese style, but this literature so far has not so much looked into outward investment as a case of fragmentation or decentralization. And there is another related literature, which especially in recent years has been increasing, which looks at China's regions in international relations, China's provinces in international relations. There are increasing studies from 2016, 18, 2020, 2021, which focus on specific cases of how China or Chinese provinces build their international relations with other countries. For example, looking at railway connections or looking at especially southern Chinese provinces and how they construct their relationships with Southeast Asian countries. But this literature also does not really so much unpack really outward investment. It focuses more on the Belt and Road Initiative, on specific infrastructure projects, but not really on overseas investment in general. So I'm adding the perspective of outward investment to this literature, basically synthesizing a little bit the international business literature and bring it into conversation with the China studies literature. Next slide, please. For my research, I selected two Chinese coastal provinces for in-depth investigation, which is a Jiangsu province. You can see it on this map, and Zhejiang province. They are relatively similar provinces in a way that I would call them ideal typical cases. They are both provinces with highest outward investment. As I have shown you before, there's Guangdong, which still has much higher investment outflows, but Jiangsu and Zhejiang, similar like Shandong, they rank basically on place. They are on rank 2, basically. So their outward investment flows, the increase of investment outflows over the years has been relatively similar and stable as well. They are in a similar location. They are both coastal provinces, and they are also among the Chinese provinces with highest economic development. However, what makes them very interesting for comparison for me was that they have very different historical conditions, especially when we compare their economic situations during the Mao period, during the pre-reform period. They were very much different in terms of focus areas of economic development or not. And I will go into detail about that in a few minutes. Previous one. Yes, then I conducted a case comparison of these two provinces. I looked, first of all, descriptively at economic development patterns. Then I inspected the internationalization trajectories of these two provinces. And then I looked more deeply into outward investment patterns and how these outward investment patterns can be related to the internationalization and economic development trajectories of the past, and how both formal and informal support mechanisms in both provinces were able to contribute to these provinces increasing overseas investment over the years, and what were differences and similarities across these formal and informal support mechanisms. I used several data sources to answer my question. So I spent 4 periods of fieldwork in China between 2015 and 2019. I finished my PhD in 2019. So the second one, the last one, was a follow-up research I conducted, especially for this book publication. And I went to a total of 11 localities in China. You can see the 2 provinces, Jiangsu and Zhejiang, on this map, and you can see the places. The red dots are the localities where I went to conduct a total of 71 interviews with government officials, with lawyers, with business representatives, with consultants, and also with scholars. I also participated in some observations. I attended trainings for government officials. I went to a bunch of investment fairs and also government organized investment promotion events where companies could attend these events. And in addition, I collected a series of Chinese primary sources, such as policy documents, of course, also media coverage, as well as statistical material, and especially the interviews. I coded them in a qualitative manner using a coding software. In addition to this fieldwork, I also had a couple of phone interviews with especially government officials. And besides these 2 provinces, I also went to Beijing and had some interviews in Berlin and also in Germany, in Bremen. So these are the data sources I used. And in the next minutes, I would like to go into the results of my work. So first of all, I present the formal support mechanisms in Jiangsu and Zhejiang. Based on the materials I collected and the interviews I found, provinces develop plans under the hierarchy of the central government. This might not be very surprising because this is something that we can see a very common phenomenon in China. The central government provides some general plans, and provinces then they make their own plans based on the central government's initiatives or guidance. There are a few examples, for example, the Jiangsu province action plan, 5-year action plan from 2015 to 2020, selected 111 key projects based on provincial economic, characteristics and situation to invest in 6 key areas, which included shipbuilding, which included also, for example, the textile industry. So based on the local condition, the provincial government really selected its own key projects and key areas for overseas investment, where the government said, okay, here we really want that enterprises invest into. The same takes place in Zhejiang province, where it also selected traditional advantageous industries, such as light industry, textile industry, and which is very well developed, as we know, especially in Hangzhou, the ICT and e-commerce sectors. So in these areas, again, it's called traditional advantageous industries, in addition to emerging industries as another sector, where the province focuses on in terms of guiding overseas investment. In addition, provinces offer several support mechanisms, such as the Jiangsu Silk Road Fund, the Jiangsu Fund for Commercial Development, which comes from the province and split between cities. Also the Zhejiang Silk Road Fund. So here we can see that provinces mirror the central government's Silk Road initiative. They also provide tax reduction and additional funding from municipalities as a means to guide provinces into the selected key projects and key areas which the government deems to be important for overseas investment, which means when a company wants to invest overseas, it is more likely to get some tax reduction, some funding support, for example, to attend international events, to do some local research in the respective or potential host country when it invests, or if it invests in one of these selected key areas. So these formal mechanisms are a way to guide enterprises to invest overseas. Next slide, please. Then there is, especially in Jiangsu province, and now I come a little bit to the differences, some additional provincial state guided investments, which are on the one hand government organized events. So the provincial government of Jiangsu, and this is also reflected on the provincial, on the municipal level, on this town level in Jiangsu province, it organizes events to provide information to enterprises, but also to all the different departments which are involved in overseas investment. It's a way to bring those different actors together and to provide them information such as about the taxation situation in the host country. It also invites banks which describe or also explain how funding procedures might work. It also invites actors which explain how the registration and approval procedures within the Chinese system for overseas investment work. So there are government organized events as a way to reduce risks for enterprises and also to guide them. Then there are also cluster investments, which are more grown in an organic fashion. And these are investments which have been taken place by enterprises earlier. For example, we have the Cambodia Sihanouk with special economic zone, which has been developed by a Jiangsu company and which provides a framework in Cambodia for other Jiangsu companies, but also other companies from China, but especially companies from Jiangsu province, to invest in this zone as well. And thereby the zones provide some framework which make investments, of course, easier, because as you can imagine, when you invest in a special economic zone, you do have access already to some infrastructure, to some experts who are already there, who can support you in getting to know the local environment, in getting to know the local legal environment and helping you through some difficulties. In addition to this, the Jiangsu government is, by means of guidance of the central government, developing, for example, an economic zone in the United Arab Emirates. So we have the central government in China, which decides with the United Arab Emirates that there should be a cooperation, a memorandum of understanding on developing or jointly developing an economic zone, and then it selects Jiangsu province to basically develop and implement the development of this zone. And the reason why the central government has selected Jiangsu province is because Jiangsu province at that time already had significant experience in investing in the United Arab Emirates. So here you can see very clearly a historical trajectory and the importance of previous investments and how previous investments inside a chain-based path for future investments. We also have long-term cooperation, international cooperation, especially from the early reform and opening period. Jiangsu province attracted much foreign investment to the province, and local enterprises, they were able to build cooperation with these foreign enterprises to work with them or for them. And based on this early cooperation, some were able to develop also connections overseas, and later on in the second step invest themselves overseas. For example, we have Suzhou Construction Machinery Group from northern Jiangsu, which invested in Germany, in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is a very particular case here, and which also used this early investments to Germany later on, and the networks it developed to from there invest further, for example, into India. So here we see some long-term cooperation which grows organically, and which is a way to access information, to build networks, and to reduce risks, and thereby also to reduce the risk to have higher costs than anticipated. Yeah. Next slide, please. The informal support mechanisms in Zhejiang province are a little bit different, and this very much relates to the historical trajectory or the historical development of Zhejiang province. I will speak about this in a few minutes. We see that the informal support mechanisms in Zhejiang are much more pronounced. There are much more events such as training workshops, which are organized by a huge number of different kinds of actors, which includes universities, which organize, for example, investment events for enterprises as a way to increase their own revenues, because workshop participants, they have to pay to participate in these events. So universities are very much interested, and they invite experts to, for example, present what kind of core regions for investments are important for Zhejiang province, what kind of sectors are important. And the same is the case for, or similar is the case for foreign investment agencies. For example, different countries in local state investment agencies, they have the office in the province. This also exists to a degree in Jiangsu province, and they organize events, they organize workshops with the aim to attract foreign investors to their region. And then there are also some events which are organized by government departments, which are very much offering a very informal platform for companies to exchange their experience, to exchange the experience or questions they also have, for example, with banks who also attend these events, or with some lawyers as well. And I would like to quote one example. One interviewee said, "We participate in trainings and platforms because in that way we receive more information compared to when we would just read something." So these trainings and platforms, they are really important for investors to, or potential investors, to get some information which otherwise is relatively hard to get. And the second one, which is very particular, more particular than the previous one, the events to Zhejiang province, is the business networks. And based on the historical conditions in Zhejiang province, the province has a very dense network of family business cultures, very close networks of family members and enterprises, which are supporting each other in domestically in their expansion of their businesses, but also overseas. So family members and friends, as one interviewer said, they make investments very easy. You have basically an investor who went to a country X and who can provide a lot of information to its friends, to its colleagues in the mainland, and can say, look, this is actually working very well. You can also come, or first you can come to work for my company to get some experience, to see how everything is working, and then you can make an investment by yourself. So these business networks are something that is very important for Zhejiang province. And in addition to that, it is also that these business networks are a way to reduce the financial burden, in a way that one interviewee said, everyone has money. So we put money into so-called underground financing, and it's being used to provide loans to small businesses. There are also subcontracts and consortia. So one interviewee also told me some investment projects, like big infrastructure investment projects, they look like they are being carried out by one investor, but in fact, there are a lot of more hidden contracts also with very small enterprises, which also take part in this overseas investment, and which can come from Zhejiang province, for example. And then there's also this organically grown industrial parks, for example. We have that in Ethiopia, which also is a way to build some bottom-up chain investment project, as well as shopping malls, where, for example, an investor invests in a shopping mall and then offers his business network at home and encourages the business network at home. You can also come and I provide you for example, the living environment, the living conditions. It's very easy. So here we also have this chain and cluster investments, which are much more pronounced in Zhejiang province than this is the case in Jiangsu province. And this leads me to some main similarities and differences. So in both provinces, we see mechanisms to reduce risks for enterprises when engaging in overseas projects. We also see in both provinces some policy guidance to guide investors towards specific sectors and towards specific countries. But there are some differences. In Jiangsu, it tends to be more on formal support. Enterprises are also more or larger, and we also see a more state-led investments. In Zhejiang, we see a little bit more of these informal networks. What I want to emphasize also in that regard, that during the period of fieldwork, I also observed that the provinces over time, they seem to be converging. So Zhejiang becomes more, the Zhejiang government becomes more in terms of providing more guidance, while there are also a lot of these private enterprises, of course, in Jiangsu province, which adopt or also in a certain way try to copy these network-based investments, Bautuan investments, which is also encouraged by the Jiangsu government, which also says companies, they should use their networks and go abroad, so-called in groups or together. And now I would like to say a few words about the historical conditions. We can trace back these differences to the pre-reform period. First of all, the outward investment patterns for Jiangsu province. This is from 2015, but it hasn't changed much in the past years. So most of the investment from Jiangsu province comes 74% from the southern part of the province. 79% are private investors, which is relatively high, but also provincial or municipal state-owned enterprises. In terms of sectors, there's a lot of machinery, textile investments, wholesale trade, and business services. And when we trace these patterns back to the past, we can see there is what is especially important is this north-south divide. So the northern part of the province during the 1970s, the reform and opening period, had a very strong industrial base, which is a result also of the state support of the heavy industry during the Mao era, which was selected based on the agricultural situation, the agricultural potential of the region, with the idea, okay, this agricultural base can support the state sector in the northern parts of the province. And in the southern parts of the province, it was different. It was basically, or it is the region where privatization was most successful, where we have a lot of these private enterprises, such as in the textile industry or in manufacturing of different goods. And here we can already see during the pre-Mao period of time, this was the region where we had a lot of handicraft and textile industries. So the north-south divide was already during the previous times, during the pre-reform period, was very important in the province. And we can still see that these differences between the northern part of the province and the southern part of the province is reflected in China's current overseas investment patterns. And this leads us to the historical conditions and investment patterns in comparison in Zhejiang province. Here we see, in terms of the main sectors, we also have a very important textile industry, spinning, weaving, but we also have a very important electronics, e-commerce, and ICT industry, which emerged in a very bottom-up fashion during the later reform and opening period, or in the early 2000s as well. We have, compared to Jiangsu province, much more private investors, which amounts to around 90% of Zhejiang's overseas investment. And we see, as I said before, investments are very often based on personal ties and support among individuals, especially during the early phase of the province's overseas investment. And this can be traced back to the past. In the late 1970s, in the reform and opening period, Zhejiang province very much lacked an industrial base, and its economic development was very much based on business clusters. So these business networks, which later helped enterprises to invest overseas, were earlier a way for enterprises, for family enterprises especially, to make a living, to develop their business ideas, and in the end also to have a very, or contribute to the very successful development of Zhejiang's economic development path. We know the Wenzhou model, which is very much the core of this network-based business cluster economic development. And these network-based clusters, this network and business relationships or relationship-based tradition can be traced back to earlier times. We have been during the Mao era. Zhejiang province was very much neglected, did not receive infrastructure investment, especially because of its close neighborhood, also location to Taiwan. It very much fell back in the economic advantages it had during the pre-Mao period, when it was still a very prosperous region, which was very much a result also of the lacking natural resources in the province in terms of agriculture. So very different compared to Jiangsu province. When we go to Zhejiang, we see there are a lot of mountains. It's very hard to have some agriculture in that region. So you already see during this pre-Mao period that it was more this small economic activities which were basically a means for people to make a living. So here we see that also in Zhejiang province, this, especially the early investment, but also still today, the network-based cluster investment can really be traced back to business cultures which predate the reform period. And these findings, to almost conclude, provide us with some broader implications, which I call for, in the case of China, the internationalization challenge. As I said before, enterprises, they face risks and costs. They need financial resources to invest overseas, and they need a support network in a certain way, be it domestic, be it a network with domestic enterprises and foreign enterprises who came to China, or among domestic enterprises like Zhejiang business networks, or be it with domestic enterprises, domestic enterprise and foreign enterprise, or a domestic enterprise overseas. So basically a domestic international network. So there is some sort of support needed for enterprises to deal with all the risks and costs to engage in overseas investment. And this leads to a challenge for especially inland provinces, because we know that the networks which I just presented, they are very localized. They exist in Zhejiang province, they exist in Jiangsu province. They, in a way, exist in Guangdong province as well. So the emergence of these networks is something that really takes time to build. Networks to partners overseas is something that needs a lot of time, and this is something for inland provinces which is much harder to achieve, and which has not reached the same level compared to the coastal provinces. Also in the coastal provinces, we have these investment agencies, foreign investment agencies. We have the universities who provide trainings for investors, for enterprises, but we don't have that to the same degree in inland provinces. And I spoke to one interviewee who said, yeah, we tried also to have some events, investment events in an inland province, but it didn't really work. We don't really have the good connections to the local government there, so we couldn't really have our investment promotion event in that region. And then we also have that financial resources, economic development is very much based, the financial resources available are very much based on provincial and municipal economic development. And all this together makes, I would claim, that a sudden increase, or in the near future, of investment coming from inland provinces very unlikely. We see some increase, of course, but it's very hard for provincial enterprises from the inland to internationalize in a fast manner. And with this, I would like to summarize my main argument, which is I provide a framework of internationalization under guided autonomy. So I argue that China's central government provides general guidance for outward investment, but it's still general. And provinces, then, they have the autonomy in designing their own support mechanisms, be it provincial or municipal government support mechanisms, or be it enterprises by themselves developing support mechanisms, or be it other actors such as universities or outward investment promotion agencies who are developing their support mechanisms. And the types of support mechanisms really depend on the locality-unique conditions of each province, of each locality. When we think about the north-south divide of Jiangsu province, even within provinces, we have huge differences, which differ across provinces and within provinces, and which are really a result also of the historical development processes. And with this, I would like to conclude, and thank you very much for your attention. And I'm very much looking forward to your questions and the discussion.